The hall near the plaza smelled of chili stew and fresh tortillas, the kind of meal that always marked my mother's birthdays. Rowan and I had driven down from Denver the night before, and as we stepped into the co-op's rented room, I was greeted by the familiar swirl of voices, cousins, neighbors, and my mother's friends from the artisan market. All eyes drifted, as they usually did, toward Sable. She stood near the cake, wearing a fitted indigo dress, laughing with Tia Paloma as if the entire evening had been planned for her. Compliments flowed easily how responsible she was, how she took such good care of our parents, how she always managed to be present. My mother smiled, adding fuel with every nod. I sat at a table near the back with Rowan, trying not to notice the weight of the comparisons. When the toasts began, Elias raised his glass quietly, but Nora interrupted with her own. She looked at me and said with a sharp little smile, "Mireya, you'll never be as good as your sister. She's the one who really supports this family." The words landed like a slap. Years of silence pressed against my ribs, and before I could stop myself, I stood. "If that's true," I said, voice shaking but firm, "then let her pay all the bills. I won't send another dollar." The room stilled. My father's eyes narrowed in confusion, and my mother scoffed. "What money? We've never received a cent from you." Conversations died around us, the air thick with disbelief. I reached for my phone, already knowing the records I had kept would not lie, even if my family's memory chose to. The disbelief on my mother's face pulled me backward in time, to long afternoons on Agua Fria when the house smelled of dust and green chili roasting outside. Sable was always in the center of things, rehearsing lines for a school play, sewing a costume for the fiesta parade, charming neighbors who stopped by. I was the quiet one, sitting on the floor with wires and an old circuit board I had salvaged from a yard sale. Whenever relatives visited, my mother would call out, "Sable, sing that song again," or show them your drawings. I'd offer a hesitant mention of a science project, but my father would wave it off with, "You should learn to be more like your sister." The comparisons came so often they stopped sounding like advice and hardened into a kind of truth in our household. I didn't resent Sable. She was my sister, and part of me admired how easily she captured attention. What gnawed at me was how invisible I felt, as though the things I loved, cables, books, old computers, were defects to be hidden. I swallowed words, thinking if I stayed quiet, at least no one would laugh. By high school, I spent more time in the library than in the bleachers. Sable won ribbons in art, while I earned steady but unremarkable grades. I dreamed of something different, a place where my worth wouldn't be measured against her applause. College became my lifeline. I chose CU Boulder, just across the border in Colorado, and left Santa Fe with 2 suitcases and the weight of every unspoken word. In Boulder, then later Denver, I built a life around work that made sense to me, lines of code that executed exactly as written, systems that didn't play favorites. Yet each time I drove the long stretch of I-25 back home, the Sangre de Cristo peaks coming into view, I felt myself shrink again, bracing for the moment someone would ask why I couldn't be more like Sable. That old echo followed me into the hall on my mother's birthday, the night my silence finally broke and left the family staring. When my father's coughing grew worse, the calls from home shifted. He had worked years in maintenance, climbing ladders and crawling under pipes, and the dust he carried in his lungs finally caught up with him. My mother tried to keep her bookkeeping job at the artisan co-op, but the hours wore her down. She sounded tired every time I called, the kind of tired that couldn't be fixed with a nap. I knew they were falling behind. Utility bills, prescriptions, even groceries, everything added weight to their already thin income. I had just settled into my job in Denver, not wealthy by any measure, but steady enough. It felt unthinkable to watch them struggle when I had the ability to help. I started sending $2,500 each month. When unexpected repairs came up, a leaking roof after the summer rains, or a spike in medical costs, I sent $2,700, sometimes even $3,000. I adjusted my own budget, skipped dinners out, and stretched groceries so that I could make the transfers without missing a beat. The problem was that my parents distrusted online banking. My mother still preferred to hold cash in her hand, and my father never opened a computer if he could avoid it. To keep things simple, I asked Sable if I could route the money through her account. She agreed right away, her voice warm, even proud of me. Of course. I'll hand it over to them, she said. Each transfer carried the same memo for parents. It felt easier that way. No awkward explanations, no lectures from my mother about technology she didn't want to learn, no confusion about apps or passwords. I trusted Sable. She lived close by. She was always at the house, and in my mind there was no reason to doubt her. So the habit formed, month after month, quiet as breathing, until the night it was thrown back in my face as if none of it had ever happened. The transfers became routine, and with each one I felt a small measure of relief, as if I were carrying my parents quietly on my shoulders from afar. But while I trimmed my budget in Denver, Sable's life in Santa Fe seemed to expand in color and shine. Her Instagram told a story I barely recognized. Photos of Canyon Road gallery parties with wine glasses raised under lantern light. Shots of her new SUV angled just so against the adobe walls. Outfits that looked more like they belonged on fashion spreads than in the closets we once shared. Relatives commented with hearts and praise, and even neighbors reposted her images as if she were a local celebrity. At first, I told myself she deserved some joy, that her charisma always pulled her into circles I could never enter. But every time I scrolled past another carefully framed picture, I wondered how she managed it while working at a gallery that I knew paid modest wages. The unease grew sharper when my mother began repeating those same lines at family calls. "Thank goodness for Sable," she said one evening when I phoned after work. "She keeps us afloat. She's always present. You should learn from her." I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, swallowing words I wanted to spill. Telling her that I was the one covering prescriptions, utilities, even groceries felt like demanding applause, and I didn't want gratitude if it had to be wrung out. Instead, I listened, murmured something polite, and let the bitterness sink deeper. Rowan noticed. One night as we cooked dinner together, he asked why I didn't just transfer money directly to my parents. "You're working so hard," he said gently, "and they don't even know it's you." What happens if Sable isn't passing along everything? I shook my head. I can't make it complicated for them. They don't trust digital banking, and Sable promised. Rowan didn't argue further, but the look in his eyes unsettled me. It was the look of someone who could already see a fracture before I admitted it existed. I tried to push it aside, even as the spotlight around my sister burned brighter. I used to imagine my sister's world as easy, bathed in applause and the glow of gallery lights, but the truth behind her polished smile was more complicated. The art market in Santa Fe ebbed with the season's tourist summers flush with buyers, winters bare and unforgiving. Rent on her small place off Cerritos Road rose each year, and the gallery owner pushed staff to bring in sponsors and sales that rarely materialized. Sable told herself she could handle it. She always had. When commissions slowed and the landlord pressed for checks, she leaned on credit cards, then leaned harder. A new crossover SUV seemed like an investment in appearances. Clients trusted people who looked successful, but the monthly payments were heavier than she admitted. When I began routing the transfers through her, it must have felt like an answer dropped into her lap. $2,500 steady each month, sometimes more, labeled neatly for parents. At first, she withdrew the full amount and handed it to them, just as promised. Then, one month, a repair bill landed for her apartment's water heater, and she told herself she'd just borrow a little. She would pay it back as soon as the next gallery show sold well. That show faltered. Another bill arrived. The borrowed money wasn't replaced, only joined by new excuses. She gave our parents a smaller portion, pocketing the rest with the steady rhythm of guilt pushed aside. Each time she told herself it was temporary, that she was only smoothing over rough weeks until the season turned. But debts have their own pace. Credit card statements stacked. The SUV needed new tires. Donors expected her to host receptions, which meant buying wine and catering she couldn't afford. Instead of confessing, she leaned further into the performance, posting photos of the parties, arranging her life into glossy rectangles that disguised the cracks. The transfers from me became part of her juggling act, feeding not just our parents' expenses, but the image she was terrified of losing. By the time my mother's birthday approached, the line between borrowing and taking had blurred into something she could no longer defend aloud. The silence after my words felt heavier than the plaster walls of the co-op hall. Forks froze above plates, and my mother's smile cracked into disbelief. "What money?" she repeated, sharper now, as if anger could erase the sting of my reply. I slid my phone from my purse, my hand steadier than I expected. With a few swipes, the record glowed on the screen, rows of transfers, month after month, each tagged with the same memo for parents. I turned the phone outward, the numbers reflected in the eyes of cousins and neighbors crowded around. Gasps rippled through the room. Tia Paloma pressed a hand to her chest, while Mateo muttered something under his breath. Sable was the first to move. She stepped forward quickly, her voice soft, coaxing. "Mireya, let's not do this here. We can talk later. Just us." Her hand fluttered toward mine as if she could push the evidence back into my pocket. "No," my father said, rising partway from his chair despite the stiffness in his lungs. His voice was rough but firm. "We'll talk now." "Is this true?" His gaze shifted between the screen and Sable, confusion written across his lined face. My mother bristled, defensive, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. She leaned toward Sable. "You told us," she stopped, the sentence breaking like a brittle branch. Sable's composure faltered. Sometimes the timing was hard. I didn't always bring the money right away, but I did what I could. That's not what this shows." Elias pressed. His hand trembled slightly on the back of his chair, but his stare was unrelenting. "This is every month, 2 years, larger sums than we ever saw." The air thickened with whispers. Aunt Clara shook her head, whispering to her husband. Even the children sensed the change, clustering near the doorway in silence. Rowan shifted beside me, not speaking, letting the weight of the truth settle without interference. I stood still, my phone extended like a witness on the stand. My parents looked at their daughters as if seeing us for the first time, not golden in shadow, but two women tangled in lies and silence, and Sable, cornered under the gaze of family and neighbors, searched for words that could hold back the tide, knowing there were none left. My mother was the first to recover her voice. She straightened her shoulders, forcing a brittle laugh that fooled no one. There must be some mistake. Sable wouldn't do that. Maybe the bank mixed things up, or Mireya misunderstood. Her words were aimed at the room as much as at me, desperate to patch the silence with excuses. Elias didn't share her reflex. He reached for my phone, studying the list of transfers with the kind of concentration he once gave to repair manuals. August 2,500, September 2,700, October 3,000, all marked for parents. "Nora, did we ever see money like this?" His tone was steady, but each word landed like a blow. My mother faltered. "Well, maybe. Maybe Sable gave us some and kept the rest for bills she thought were urgent. She helps in other ways, rides, errands. We should be grateful." Tia Paloma shook her head sharply. "Grateful I paid for Elias's inhalers last spring. Remember Sable told me money was tight, that you two had nothing extra?" The memory cut through the haze, planting itself in the middle of the room. Sable's face paled. She tried to speak, but stumbled. I didn't always bring it right away. Things came up. The gallery was struggling, and I thought I could replace it later." Her hands trembled as she gripped the back of a chair. "It wasn't every month, just sometimes." Elias fixed his eyes on her. How many times her silence stretched. The kind that told the answer before she spoke. Finally, with her voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Most of them." The room sagged as though the walls themselves had absorbed the confession. My mother's mouth opened and closed, but no words came. My father lowered himself back into his chair, eyes clouded with disbelief. I held my phone tighter, the glow of the screen still marking every transaction. Around us, whispers swirled, but no one dared to fill the space that her admission had carved open. It was in that hollow, unbearable quiet that the weight of years shifted, and the next words waiting would change everything. The tension inside the hall grew unbearable, so someone opened the doors, and the crowd spilled onto the sidewalk. The dusk over Santa Fe was deepening, the adobe walls glowing faintly pink before surrendering to night. Sable stood a few feet away, arms wrapped around herself, no longer smiling, no longer radiant. Her voice cracked as she began. "Yes, I kept most of it. 2,700 once, 3,000 another time. I told myself it was just to cover the debts, the SUV payments, things I couldn't admit to anyone. I thought I'd replace it before anyone noticed, but it kept going. I couldn't stop." Relatives murmured in low voices, some shaking their heads, others refusing to look at her. Nora pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes darting between us. Elias's face was gray in the fading light. Sable's words tumbled faster, as if confessing could save her. "I didn't want to disappoint you. Everyone believed I was the one helping, and I couldn't admit the truth. I was terrified that if I failed, you'd see me differently. So I lied, and I let you keep praising me while Mireya carried everything." The silence that followed was heavier than any accusation. Nora finally whispered, "All these years." Her voice broke, torn between shame and disbelief. Elias looked at me then, his eyes tired but steady. "Mireya, I was wrong. I should have seen you. I should have believed in you." His words weren't loud, but they carried through the group, cutting deeper than Sable's confession. Rowan stepped forward, calm but firm. "What matters now is clarity. No more hidden transfers, no more comparisons. If this family wants to heal, it needs rules that everyone follows." I nodded, still holding the phone at my side, as the night gathered around us and the crowd waited for what would come next. The street lamps flickered on, casting long shadows across the sidewalk as the circle of family tightened. My pulse slowed, steady now, as if the storm had cleared enough for me to speak without shaking. "I'll keep helping," I said, "but only if things change." Every eye turned toward me. "First, I don't want to hear another comparison between me and Sable. I am not a lesser version of her, and she isn't some perfect measure for my life. That ends tonight." My mother stiffened, but my father gave a slow nod, urging me on. "Second," I continued, "the money goes directly into a joint account with Mom. Every payment is recorded, every bill matched with a receipt. I'm not sending anything through someone else again." Rowan's presence beside me steadied my resolve. He added quietly, "Transparency protects everyone." "And third," I said, looking at Sable, "you need to contribute. Not just promises, a set amount each month. And when you can't give money, you show up doctor's visits with Dad, fixing things around the house, driving them when they need it." Sable's face tightened, pride and shame colliding. "You're asking me to admit I failed." "You already admitted it," Elias said gently. His voice carried the authority of a man who had watched enough lies crumble in one evening. "Now it's time to repair what's broken." Nora shook her head at first, muttering that family shouldn't need rules, but Elias cut in firmly. "We do now. We lost trust, and this is how we earn it back." Sable's silence stretched. Then she exhaled. "Fine. I'll do it." The words were reluctant, but they were real. The air felt different then. Not healed, but shifted. The first scaffolding of something sturdier rising out of the ruin. In the months that followed, the rules we had laid out held firm. I sent $2,500 each month into the joint account with my mother, and every transfer matched a receipt: utilities, prescriptions, groceries. There was no room for confusion, no gaps for lies to hide. Sable surprised me. She sold the SUV that had once gleamed on her feed and replaced it with a modest used sedan. $300 arrived from her each month, not much compared to what I carried, but it was consistent, more than the money. She started showing up driving Dad to the clinic, fixing the back gate, helping Mom at the market. Nora shifted too. Her calls became gentler, asking about the projects I worked on in Denver, listening as if my words carried weight. Elias, never one for boasting, now spoke carefully when neighbors asked about us. "Both my daughters keep us going," he'd say. The pride tempered but real. Rowan and I visited Santa Fe one weekend in the fall, walking Canyon Road as the galleries glowed with warm light. For once, I didn't feel like a shadow trailing behind anyone. I felt equal, rooted in the truth we had fought to uncover. Later that evening, Sable and I lifted a repaired gallery frame together, the wood still smelling of fresh stain. We carried it side by side under the amber street lamps, neither ahead of the other. The weight balanced evenly between us. It wasn't absolution, but it was a beginning. A different kind of beautiful than the one I had grown up chasing. If respect is finally the currency, what will you refuse to spend it on ever again?